This is not done until it's done. And the next 2 to 3 months of negotiations are going to be absolutely critical for making sure that we are memorializing an agreement that gives us confidence and gives the world confidence that Iran, in fact, is not pursuing a nuclear weapon.
President Obama in Jamaica yesterday on his way to the Summit of the Americas discussing the Iran deal. Welcome into America's Forum for this Friday. Alongside Miranda Khan, J.D. Hayworth, it is so good to have you with us.
That it is. Iran is a topic on many people's minds, and not just for the nuclear deal. There is a lot of concern over Iran's attempts to have influence in Latin America.
For more on our top story, let's bring in retired Air Force General Michael Hayden. General Hayden also served as the director of both the NSA and the CIA. He's now a principal in the Chertoff Group. Mike, it's always good to have you here on America's Forum.
Thanks, JD. Quite a morning, isn't it?
Boy, it sure is. A lot of news breaking all over the place. And let's begin with a political announcement that may have some impact on public policy. Hillary Clinton's team saying that she will make her announcement that she's running for president this weekend. If memory serves, you directed the NSA under President Bill Clinton. And of course, now that Mrs. Clinton has served as our Secretary of State, how does her foreign policy philosophy figure into our future?
Well, frankly, JD, I think you will find that practically any of the candidates, including a President Clinton, if that were to be, would be more inclined to be more involved in the world than I think we have been in the past 6.5 years. We would be perhaps more engaged more early, taking more responsibility for events, particularly before they get out of control. I think one of the issues we now have with Syria and Iraq is we played so lightly in the beginning.
And mindful of that, General, there is another area of influence where Iran has moved far beyond the borders of the Middle East to come into our hemisphere, into Latin America. A lot of people don't realize the extent of Iranian involvement in Central America. Could you outline that for us as the Summit of the Americas is getting underway in Panama today?
Sure. We've seen this for a while. Now, it was a fairly light, more irritating than strategically significant hand. What you had was, well, if I could be unkind, it was kind of a collection of the island of forgotten toys. I mean, regimes that were in trouble and isolated. It was Iran and Venezuela, Iran and Ecuador, and then Iran and some of the states in Central America, like El Salvador. It was as if these isolated nations were looking to reinforce one another through some sort of relationships. What really troubled us, JD, was weekly air travel between Tehran and Venezuela for no visible commercial purpose. And, people can do that symbolically for political impact, but we were afraid it became a traffic for things and stuff and people and money that may be on the dark side of what some of these nations do.
General, what country do you think is the most vulnerable to fall under Iranian's influence?
Well, I mean, right now, the one most vulnerable in the world is obviously Iraq. In our hemisphere, I would suggest Venezuela, simply because the Venezuelans, because of the cost of oil and horrific mismanagement, or in dire economic straits. If the Iranians were able to get their economic act together, and that, of course, is a byproduct of what we do with sanctions, they may be able to assist the Venezuelans.
Well, the Venezuelans, that is the paradox, because there is all that oil in Venezuela. And in the minute remaining, Mike, maybe we ought to amplify this. Those weekly flights between Tehran and Caracas. Are you concerned that Iran is using Venezuela as a way station, if you will, to come across our porous southern border? 40 seconds.
Yeah, we always did. We looked at it. If you recall, we saw the Iranians getting involved in Mexican drug cartels, that assassination attempt. Ottawa Bear at a restaurant in Georgetown. Recall that about 2 summers ago. So there was always this concern that the Iranians could use Venezuela or even the Lebanese expatriate community, which is quite active in Latin America, as people they could count on to do some of the things they wanted to do.
Michael Hayden, we very much appreciate your perspective. In fact, we're going to ask you to stay with us, General. And those of you watching wherever you are, we hope you'll stay with us too, as America's Forum continues on this Friday from Newsmax TV.
We have a bipartisan group. I think there's close to a dozen Democrat co-sponsors that say before the president can lift the sanctions against Iran, those imposed by Congress, that Congress has to have a say. So now the president has already threatened to veto the legislation. And we have a bipartisan group working together that say, look, we need to have a say. The American people ought to have a say before you go to the UN Security Council.
Republican Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming speaking out on MSNBC's Morning Joe about this proposed nuclear deal with Iran. And as we hear this morning, it looks as if the Senate is moving closer to that bipartisan veto-proof majority. So the Senate can weigh in on this agreement, which constitutionally they need to do on treaties. It's all a part of America's Forum with Miranda Khan, J.D. Hayworth here.
Yeah, meanwhile, in Tehran, the nation of Iran celebrated what they're calling National Nuclear Technology Day, showing off some of their latest nuclear achievements, including a nuclear fuel assembly for power reactors.
As to the deal itself, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, gave some indication of how he feels about it, tweeting out the American narrative of the deal points is wrong, and Americans, quote, always deceive and breach promises. So that is the prelude for us to continue our conversation with retired Air Force General Michael Hayden. General Hayden, are you surprised in any way by the Iranian reaction?
No, I guess I'm really not, JD. I'd hoped perhaps for something more muted and more supportive from the Supreme Leader, and even for discounting parts of what he said for political reasons and local consumption in Iran. You realize, JD, in a normal world, with the head of a foreign government saying what he said, in a normal world, this would be over. We would be done. We would simply say, well, we don't have a deal. And so, I mean, what he pointed out was so dramatic. Number one, without being specific, the American point paper is all wrong. Number two, you've got to lift all sanctions, not nuclear sanctions, all sanctions. Number three, you've got to list them all at once, right at the beginning. And number four, you're never going to get to see any of our military installations. Any of those would be a deal breaker. So where do we go from here?
Well, Arizona Senator John McCain says Secretary of State John Kerry is, quote, delusional on claims in the Iran deal. Strong words, but is there some truth to that? Because you're saying, where do we go from here?
Well, I mean, we don't have a deal. I
We
think
have the
that's
framework
clear.
of a deal.
And those things that we claimed have been agreed, our negotiating partner has said are not agreed. And even the French have a white paper out there that is inconsistent with our views. So I would say right now all is chaos, which then, JD and Miranda, play back to your original point. I think Congress needs to look into this. What's going on here? What are the facts?
Well, speaking of that, we know for a fact that yesterday in Iran, it was National Nuclear Technology Day. Now, pardon the colloquialism, General, but are the Iranians just trying to rub our nose in it?
They would take advantage of that. Look, when this first happened, and people were saying, you know, Zarif is saying different things in Tehran than Kerry is saying in Washington, I said, well, you have to expect that, and in some ways you want that, because each guy has got to sell the deal to his constituency. But in the last couple of days, JD, the stories have become so disparate that they don't link back to the original deal. It's as if there is nothing back there. And so what's that next session? How does that begin? Well, the Iranian team, could you tell us which of our 4-page point paper is wrong? I mean,
General,
it's to my mind, yesterday's events were stunning, and I cannot see how State Department spokesman or even White House spokesman can repeat what the president said earlier about, quote unquote, this historic agreement. What agreement?
Right. And so do you think talks should end now?
There's an emotional impulse to say, well, clean up your act, send somebody who's authoritative to negotiate, and just disregard the talks, Miranda. But I would not. I would make it really clear to the world, this is Iran's fault. But boy, I'd give damn clear negotiating instructions to our team. We have given it the office already. We're done.
Well, before we get done, General, 30 seconds on Edward Snowden from you. He was interviewed in Russia, talked about how easy it is to hack passwords. He also, of course, said he'd really like to come back here. Would you like to see Snowden back in American territory, in American hands?
I would love it. I would go to the airport to greet him. I would celebrate the return of the prodigal son here. And the first thing I think needs to be said to him when he gets off the aircraft is, you have the right to remain silent.
Well, certainly something that obviously deals with the damage perceived by many that has been done to our foreign policy, courtesy of Mr. Snowden. General Hayden, as always, we appreciate your thoughts, and America's Forum will continue right after this.